One of the drivers behind tree equity score is just this idea that we need to sort of change our understanding of baselines. Communities should have this baseline standard of tree cover, just like we have infrastructure for roads and building standards and schools. And so when we talk about kind of achieving tree equity, it's achieving that baseline all across America for what kind of the expectations are and the standards of health are in our communities. What makes a healthy community. I think, that would look and feel dramatically different.
Hey folks, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. My name is Matthew Christoph, and on this podcast, we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. Now today, we're talking tree equity and the tree equity score. American Forests is a nonprofit organization out of the United States. They were formed back in 1875. They've been around a while, and they're all about protecting and restoring healthy forest ecosystems. Now, they created this tool called the Tree Equity Score, and it tells you how equitable your community is based off the tree cover. Why is that important? We're going to find out. Apparently, tree equity is crucial for all kinds of different health reasons, for economic reasons, for mental health reasons, and we're going to dive deep into it and why this score is important, why tree equity is important, why you should care, and the real world problems that come with having inequitable communities when it comes to tree cover. The real consequences, even death is a possibility when you don't have these fantastic beings to protect us from the sun's rays, And we dive deep into it. It was really, really great. Two people came on, Benita Hussein and Julia Twitchell, both work for American Forests, and they both tell an incredible story about benefits of trees to society and the importance of thinking about trees as an equitable resource. So, sponsors for this episode. West Fraser is the number one sponsor for 2023. Without them, this would not be possible. Thank you, West Fraser, for your support. And Greenlink Forestry is the second sponsor. They have been with me since the beginning. Thank you so much, Greenlink, for all of your support. Couldn't do it without you. So, without any further messing around, let's dive straight into this conversation, talking about tree equity, talking about the tree equity score, and how we can make it a more equitable society for everybody. Here we go. Well, thank you to both of you for coming on the show here today. This is going to be an interesting one for me. I'm out of my depth, so I'm looking forward to having people that know what they're talking about talk about this tree equity thing. So before we get into American Forests, tree equity, and all of the heavy deets, we need to get to know the both of you a little bit. So just basically, who are you? Why are you with American Forests? What's your role? That kind of thing. Just brief. So whoever wants to start.
I can start. Okay. I'm Benita Hussein. I am the Tree Equity Program Lead here at American Forests. And my background is really around working with cities on climate change issues as well as urban greening. And I have worked in this space for about 22 years, having both been a climate policy advisor to two different mayors, Mayor Menino of Boston, as well as Mike Bloomberg of New York City, for whom I've created campaigns around the issues of climate and urban greening, and have recently joined American Forests from a large organization called the Trust for Public Land, where I helped run a 300-city campaign on getting more parks and green space in cities. So running the tree equity program here at American Forests is this perfect sort of amalgam of all my background.
That's cool. Very, very cool.
So I'm Julia Twitchell. I work on the data science team at American Forest. I'm the director of data design and user experience. So I kind of work a little bit more on the sort of front end data delivery side of our team. And really what we try to do is get sort of the data and the science into urban communities' hands so that they have the resources to advocate for their causes. And so really what we believe is science should be for everyone. Data can be democratized. And that's what we're really trying to do with our team and with Tree Equity Score.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Okay, awesome. So individuals, start with you, Benita. Why American forests? And more in the core of the question is why forests? Why is that something that you've decided to dedicate your part of your life to advocating for and pushing for that kind of stuff?
So American Forests is the oldest conservation organization in the United States, but over the last 5 years, it has taken its deep history in working on forest restoration out west and large landscapes in partnership with the U.S. government, has really pivoted towards this idea of tree equity and working directly with cities or in urban landscapes, because that is where most of the population lives. So if we're going to deliver the benefits of trees to people, of course, we need to be working in cities, but also this emphasis on the idea that those benefits are not equally distributed around the country or within our cities. Communities of color and poor communities tend to have less tree canopy and therefore are suffering more from things like extreme heat and extreme flooding and extreme weather events. So the reason why I thought this was really important work to move into from years and years of working on climate issues and urban planning issues is because of this emphasis on equity and us really needing to meet this moment. It's a moment of crisis. It's a life or death issue, as we've seen from this summer of extreme heat. If we aren't delivering trees and the benefits of trees to populations that need them the most, then we have a really big moral imperative of our time that we're dealing with. Right.
Yeah. No, and it's funny because like the tree, I don't think like 10 years ago that I would have considered trees to be a social justice problem, right? But like looking at it now, as soon as you, it's like someone opened up a door, right? They're like, you're like, oh, right. Obviously, that makes a huge difference, and we'll get into all that.
Yeah,
so, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, as a geographer, totally it's the power of maps, right? Like when you see the data laid out, and you can look, like in Tree Equity Score, you can see, every city, every urban center in America, and that pattern is everywhere. And I think that's what's so striking about a tool like Tree Equity Score is that, it takes it away from being just a localized sort of problem and makes it apparent that this is like a national issue. And so I think trying to get those maps out and helping people really connect and visualize with that information to see that it's in every city.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it totally makes sense. As soon as you can visualize like a problem like that, it just becomes apparent. You're like, oh, damn, that's okay. Like it just makes it clear and it helps paint the picture, push it on the politicians, get them to do something if you can. That's always hard.
Yeah. Well, well, that is actually a really big part of the work. We rely on data scientists like Julia, who are obviously some of our experts in-house to develop the tools and the resources to help city leaders and community leaders advocate and make change in their communities using real numbers and data. It's a real case building. And because of this powerful tool that Tree Equity Score is, having both national numbers and city by city numbers and down to the parcel level, we really can help articulate the need for how to invest in trees and where to invest in trees to benefit the most number of people.
Yeah, no, that's huge. It's wild that it's taken as long as it has to really, like, I know there was a Tree Equity Score before this. This isn't the first generation of it, but it's interesting that this is not something that we've been talking about for, 60 years. But yeah, I guess this is the first time we've had the data, the satellite imagery and the LiDAR and all the other stuff to actually like compile this information at, you could sit at your desk and do it kind of. Yeah. So interesting. Okay. I guess we need to talk about American forests. So yeah, I'm Canadian. I actually was completely unaware of American forests or what they were. So for my Canadian listeners, as well as the American listeners that might not know, what's American forests?
Sure. So as mentioned, oldest conservation organization in the country, but has really spent the duration of its history working on everything from the restoration of forests all the way towards the national policy and policy movements around ensuring that we can maintain, restore, and protect as many forested landscapes as possible, both out west and, again, in larger landscapes as well as in cities. And so we do that through a number of ways, right? We, as I mentioned, work at the federal level, hoping to unlock large amounts of public funding to funnel towards communities and cities and states to improve their forested landscapes. And then also working all the way down to the community level, whether that's helping with funding, helping with the technical tools like tree equity score, and helping, with the broad suite of tools and resources any city might need, including master planning, to help ensure that their trees are protected for the long term. And we do this, again, at the center of all of this is this idea that trees are important for people. And now, as you mentioned earlier, they're an essential part of our climate justice conversations and our health justice conversations. And so we see ourselves really as partners for people at all levels of government down to the grassroots level to help ensure that this really important issue is addressed.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I don't know if we have anything like that in Canada. I have to look into it now. I haven't thought about it till just now, but yeah, it seems like a absolutely crucial element of maintaining equity across all kinds of different places, right? Is just making sure that, I think most people don't recognize the importance of trees, right? And like what that does for a community, what that does for our health, and what that does for everything. So, with that, I think we should jump straight into that. First of all, why are trees an equity issue? Like, more specifically, I should clarify, why are trees important? Why is this something that needs to be focused on? In an equity sort of way. Yeah.
We always start with the data, right? And so, so Julia has like all of the national data points that we could really lean into to demonstrate how certain populations that do have access to trees differ from those that do not. And so would love to turn it over to Julia to help sort of extrapolate on some of the things that we've learned from tree equity score and how it's helping build the case for trees across the country.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Totally.
And, I was referring earlier to kind of this pattern, right, that you see on the map. Trees are sparse in communities of color and low-income communities, but the data and the numbers really back that up kind of nationally. So what we found by kind of analyzing tree equity score data is neighborhoods with the fewest residents of color tend to have 4 times more tree canopy per person and are 13 degrees cooler than neighborhoods with the most residents of color. And you see a similar pattern for poverty rates as well. So the lowest poverty rates have double the tree canopy per person and are about 6 degrees cooler than neighborhoods with the highest poverty rate. So this is something where if you're walking, from one neighborhood to another, you're actually going to feel the difference in terms of the heat differential. And I think it's something that, all of us can relate to. If you've been to a city and you're just on a hot day in a heat wave, it's really that tangible that trees can provide that kind of protection and cooling.
Yeah.
And I think also something that needs to be said is, these are patterns that we're seeing now, but this is the result of inadequate policies and these systemic inequities in our governance and planning processes that have been underway for decades and are continuing today. And what that's resulting in is really an unfair distribution of trees that is further exacerbating these social and climate injustices. As the heat waves are coming in, as air pollution is becoming more and more of a problem, that unequal distribution is not creating protections in communities that are kind of on the front end of climate change. And so when we talk about tree equity, we're trying to make a point that it's about getting trees planted first in areas that need them most. It's about investing in those areas that have the greatest need, and really about redressing those inequities that have been sort of building up from this history, this legacy, and have really sort of embedded themselves in our urban landscapes.
Yeah. And
absolutely.
And just to add on to that, I think it's very important as far as American forests, but even as around the broader tree equity issue, is to say that we're not talking about trees for trees' sake. We're talking about trees in order to benefit the lives of people. And we see all of these discriminatory planning and policy practices over the last few decades, specifically around redlining, if we're going to name it, have led to a disenfranchisement of certain communities from services. And trees are one of those services, but so are fair access to food and transportation and other important health services and amenities. So as we think about the future of American forest tree equity work, we see this as an intersectional issue with all of those other sectors I just mentioned, including housing. And so the future for us is really thinking about all the different partners we need to bring to the table to talk about this within their context. So whether this is a climate justice issue, as we talked about, whether this is a health issue, as we talked about, these are all really important players in this conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. So diving even deeper into the concept of the importance of trees, like you touched on health a little bit, Julia, on heat. Sorry. We touched on the heat wave a little bit and how we can all feel that, right? And going even deeper than that, when you look at is there more data, like maybe health data or other data that you can point to that is poor also that you can point to because of the lack of tree canopy? Like, for example, maybe the sewage is backed up way more often because there's no trees evapotranspirating lots of the water and downfall or rainfall, right? Maybe there's more asthmatic issues or breathing issues because there isn't that clean oxygen being pumped into I just know we're talking about ecosystem services as well as like all the types of stuff that trees can offer. I want to really paint a really good picture for people about like, okay, what does a tree do for me besides being like, oh, it's a tree and it's kind of hot when there's no tree. Like what else? How much deeper is it?
And carbon sequestration and all of these other benefits. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we can detail that in some way, paint a good picture for it, I think that would go a long way in helping people understand the importance of
this type of trees are like the jack of all trades in our communities. They really do like so many different things. I think, when we talk about heat, we talk about shade, but also you have to think about urban heat is, the pavement heats up during the day, but then retains and re-radiates that heat at night. And trees are really crucial for helping cities release that heat and kind of recover from that kind of a heat wave. And so that translates to like these energy savings as well. We have to air conditioning, and that's household savings, household level savings that I think to kind of factor in that benefit. Health benefits are super well documented. There's a ton of scientific research out there linking trees to, absorption of air pollution, so lowering not lowering lung health, benefiting lung health, and benefiting, lowering asthma rates, benefiting cardiac health as well.
Making it so we can breathe good. Yeah.
And also a ton of research on the mental health benefits as well. Like they talk about forest bathing, but also just like being, surrounded by greenery is just, really good for your mental health. And that economically translates to dollars saved as well in terms of like avoided healthcare costs. So I think, both on the individual level and also like on the community level, there's a lot of benefit there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you point out the fact that all of those negative things are happening to the poorest people in society who can't afford to deal with them. They might not have insurance for health, or they might not have the ability to pay for air conditioning. They might not, like all those things. So it's like, these are happening to the people that are having the hardest time already. And so it just amplifies the poverty, amplifies the inequity and everything else for sure.
Yeah. And there's actually some burgeoning research out there about the benefits of having close by trees with even gun violence, right? That's related to the mental health issues. And so, folks out of UPenn have been studying this for many years. And so, the data is there. But Julia, you also have some like super interesting data through the tree equity score on how much carbon could potentially be sequestered through and ecosystem benefits monetary wise. We would sort of see through advancing tree equity nationally. And I'll mention that what we do know is that, if we have the number we are looking at is about 500 million trees. 500 million trees would help us advance tree equity nationally, that would help us sequester 9 million metric tons of carbon. So real true benefits around climate action as well.
Yeah, and one way we like to kind of repackage that to make that feel a little bit more tangible is that would be the equivalent of about 4 million homes' energy use emissions each year. A huge savings there. Obviously a huge 500 million trees is a huge goal to set too, but the benefits are equally large. And from like the air pollution standpoint, trees would remove enough particulate air pollution to offset 7 million cars from the road each year. So you can, everyone knows, living near highways, living near, a lot of traffic, that's, the benefits are huge. Like that ability to buffer that kind of air pollution is so important.
Absolutely. That totally makes sense. I know in the city that I live in Edmonton, a while back they did the city did an inventory of all their trees, and they provided all the stats for every single tree that the city owned, right? That was how much water or like sewage, savings there was, how much heat savings there was. Anyways, they did the math on what the monetary value of each tree was to that neighborhood. And like a 50-year-old American elm was worth anywhere from $50,000 to $150,000. That was how much it saved the community over its lifetime. And it was, including the carbon sequestration and all this kind of thing. And you're like, to think about a tree as being worth $150,000, like that was on the higher end. Most of them were closer to 50, right? But still, $50,000 for a tree. You're like, well, that doesn't like, but the math adds up, and they did it. It was all held together really well, and it helps put into perspective so people understand. Like, listen, this is what a tree can do for you.
Yeah,
and it's really crucial, and it's easy to be like, we need something else. We need we should put our money towards a hospital or whatever else. But it's like, listen, this is a ongoing issue that's just going to keep compounding and making it worse and worse and worse. And I think it's a fascinating idea to just be like, hey, listen, all we got to do is plant some trees, and we're going to see massive benefits across society, right?
Yeah,
it's huge.
Yeah. And each of these, and we could talk about this in monetary value. We talk about this in asthma rates or mental health or around carbon. Or again, around extreme heat, but each of us having tools like Tree Equity Score again are helping us articulate different cases to different audiences. And so, we were able to, American Forest very successfully over this past year, able to unlock $1.5 billion in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service around the Inflation Reduction Act. And that $1.5 billion, that is an unprecedented amount of money to go towards urban forests in this country.
Yeah.
And, we are, again, future of our tree equity work is to help drive those dollars to the communities so they can use those dollars towards, again, the protection or maintenance and restoration of trees in their communities. And, and we were able to work with that, using this data for those advocacy efforts. And so we're just very excited about having Tree Equity Score, and it's again in an improved form now to ensure that we can really ensure trees for the future of many generations.
Totally. That's incredible. So, for example, you said you wanted to do 500 million trees. That's the goal of American Forest, to plant 500 million trees across the neighborhoods of society that need it the most. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Right?
What we know is that 500 million trees is what we need to advance tree equity in this country. So we do that with partners, like the U.S. government. Gotcha. We do that. We enable those environments environments at the community level to ensure that trees can be maintained and planted. And so, but we just know that that's our mega number to ensure that we can get to this.
That's the ultimate goal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and you said you unlocked about $1.5 billion in funding for communities to reach out to and grab.
Yes.
How much of a dent would that put in the 500 million trees?
Oh, that's a very good question. going to have to come back to you on that one.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Yeah. Because I think it'd be interesting to know, like, what does it cost to do that? Because I realize, planting trees in an urban environment is obviously a lot more complicated than just like, we'll just go plant it. Because like a lot of places, there's just concrete everywhere. So you need to, first of all, probably dig up the concrete and like create an actual space to put a tree. Whereas like, if you're the forest industry, planting a tree is whatever. It's just, you just go and do it. It's done. It's not a problem. You don't have to worry about people stamping on it or trampling it or whatever. And there's like, so obviously every tree going in the ground is going to cost orders of magnitude more than it would just like a normal tree planter in a forest industry or something like that. So, I would love to know if you can figure that out. That'd be great. It'd be good to know. I could throw it in the show notes if nothing else.
That sounds good. Yeah. But there's also another reason why we think it's important for us to, well, there's two things. One is that, we really want to emphasize the idea of maintaining. So it's just not about tree planting. It's about, it's not just about tree planting, It's about this idea that trees exist in cities. We shouldn't be extracting necessarily. It just depends on local context, of course. But we do want to ensure that there is, that we are helping communities develop the workforce, develop the funding to ensure that what they have, you got to keep it going. And also in the current environment, making sure that the species that they do maintain are climate resilient, heat resilient, disease resistant. So there's a lot of work that goes around this like living, breathing infrastructure that we are working on, and cities are very different than highways and bridges. And so, but they're clearly, as Julia already said, they're a jack of all trades, and they can really ensure many, many benefits for cities.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, no, the climate change thing is always like, okay, so what are we going to what's the climate going to be in 50 years? And you have to prepare that tree for that situation. And so, it's not just plant a tree. You have to be doing, there's all kinds of deep diving, and it's a lot of work. I don't doubt that at all, for sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So, okay, just as a thought experiment, imagine in whatever, say 10 years, you hit the 500 million trees with all the partners and everything. Like, so that's, you've hit the goal. How does that alter America? How does that alter the lives of the people there? Like, what would that do?
I think, one point I think that we should make too is, one of the drivers behind Tree Equity Score is just this idea that we need to sort of change our understanding of baselines. Communities should have this baseline standard of tree cover, just like we have infrastructure for roads and building standards and schools. And so when we talk about kind of achieving tree equity, it's achieving that baseline all across America for what kind of the expectations are and the standards of health are in our communities. What makes a healthy community? I think, that would look and feel dramatically different, to have trees filling in gaps all across our communities. I think, anyone who's traveled to, an urban environment knows, like, whether you're in a big city, there's built up areas, industrial areas, commercial areas that don't have trees, but also, I live in a more kind of peri-urban, almost rural area, but my urban center has the same sort of issue. And so, you can, I think, bringing trees into those areas would, dramatically change sort of the look and feel, and really feel like you're creating a standard of health, I think, for all these communities. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do the rich people get to have all the nice things? Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. It totally makes sense.
Yeah. And I think what Julia said is actually really important, that, while we have these really great macro numbers, the local context is very important. So the ways that we plant and again, maintain trees are all really based on what communities need. And I think a big part of our work, a big part of our local level work is bringing communities that have not been part of the conversation in the ways their cities have been designed, to bring them in to help imagine what it would look like to have 100% tree equity in their cities. What would it look like for, and how do we activate those neighborhoods in ways that are responsive to the local cultures, context, people. And and have them really drive some of that decision making. That's a huge part of this work. And another part of this work I should mention is, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, is just this workforce idea. We know that a big part of even meeting that macro number, that 500 million, or the local level numbers that we need, are driven by people going out there and taking care of those trees, planting those trees. It's a real art. It's an art and it's a science. And we at American Forest are helping communities build workforce at the local level to deliver the benefits of employment to the neighborhoods that need these trees, but also as sharing the economic benefits of trees, as well as helping fill in a really important gap in the long-term sustainability of trees in those communities.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So it's not just, so you can't just think about this as like, hey, we want to plant a bunch of trees and make sure they stick around. This is like, you need to change the governing systems to ensure that they understand that, listen, it is important that there is a maintenance of whatever X number of canopy cover across all communities. And that will benefit X, Y, and Z. And I find with politicians, you always got to put it back to numbers. You got to be like, listen, this is how much money you're going to save if you keep these trees going. Unfortunately, that's the way they seem to look at things. But I think, that's huge. This is really so there was obviously a lot of effort going into it, like maybe not lobbying, that's not the right word, but campaigning to try and get the point out, like, listen, we need to change the governing system and have different legislation in that says, like, listen, we need to know that this is going to be maintained forever.
Yeah.
And these are the benefits. And so, yeah.
Certainly. But, I will say that, and the one thing about working at sort of that city level is that, mayors and community leaders, they see the impacts of their decisions and the laws that they make on a day-to-day basis, right? And so we have been really fortunate to be working with a number of cities that have really strong leadership. So, the city of Phoenix has been, obviously highly impacted by extreme heat, but in 2021, put out a citywide proclamation that they are going to advance tree equity across the city, in partnership with us, certainly. But that's, cities coming out like that powerfully and saying that we know this is going to benefit the people that live here on a number of levels.
Right.
We feel very happy and like proud to have worked with some really, really strong allies at the political level. And so Phoenix is just one of many cities that we have been able to work on this issue with, but it's a growing movement. Yeah.
No, it's huge. It's absolutely, there's so much to it. It's crazy. I hope to see it get bigger and bigger and stretch out into Canada. I don't know what our canopy cover is like in Canada. I think it's not bad, but that's a different thing. But I'm sure Vancouver and Toronto could probably use some help. I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, maybe not the first to know, but early knowledge around the fact that we are hoping to expand tree equity score into some global cities beyond the US. So we have, we're looking at the UK, we're looking at cities in Canada, and maybe more, but we think that this type of knowledge would be super helpful in different countries as well.
Absolutely. And we're talking about climate change and globalization and everything else, like a change here is a change there, right? So it helps out everywhere. Absolutely. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So we should talk about the actual tree equity score. We talked about tree equity a bunch. Let's actually talk about the tree equity score. So, you've touched on it a little bit. But I'll just start from scratch. What is the tree equity score?
Let's dig into this. Yeah. So tree equity score, it is a free tool that American Forest created, to kind of create a prioritization system to help get trees to folks who need them the most. So this is a single measure from 0 to 100, and it's a combined measure of both tree canopy need, but also kind of social, climate, and health priority. And so if you have a score of 100, that means you have enough trees, you're kind of at that baseline standard. But the lower the score, the greater the need or priority for investment. This is a really unique approach in forestry and urban forestry. It's an equity-first approach. It's a human-centered approach to filling gaps in the urban forest. So we just released, I think we touched on this, we just released a new version of Tree Equity Score, and what's super exciting about it is that it now covers all urban areas in America. And so, when we think urban, you think big cities, but this new release has really expanded that to population centers of many, many smaller communities, about 8,000 smaller communities with kind of these urban population hubs, or just not even urban. And so this means that a lot of more people have access to this tool. And what's really exciting about it is it's kind of a national standard. It's got recognition that adds a lot of sort of credibility and kind of that data-driven approach to kind of the experts who are already experts in their local context, who are already working on the ground and have their own sort of observations and tools they might be using. It's really complementary to kind of help back up your cause locally.
Yeah. Excellent. No, that makes total sense. So, okay. I want to get into how the score is calculated. But first of all, I want to talk about what does 100 mean? So you said it's a score from 0 to 100. And what does that scale, what does that scale mean ultimately? And then we can dive into how it's calculated, because I'm sure it's all tied together.
Yeah. So, so it's a combined measure of tree canopy need and priority. So let's talk about each one sort of individually. When we measure tree canopy need, we're using Google Tree Canopy, high resolution tree canopy, to measure the actual tree canopy in each. It's block group level tool, so kind of think neighborhood level tree canopy. And then we're measuring.
Okay. So this is like using satellite imagery to measure how much tree canopy is covering the ground.
Yep, tree
sort of
canopy
thing, right?
coverage. Yep, and it's measured as a percent of the sort of total area of the neighborhood. And then we're tracking that against sort of what's called a tree canopy goal, which is that sort of baseline minimum standard tree canopy that can kind of provide those basic health and safety benefits, right? And that goal is scaled to where you are. So it's kind of scaled to your local ecology. If you're in a forested biome, that goal is going to be a little higher, so you can support more trees. If you're in a desert biome, water restrictions, different kinds of tree species, it's going to be a lower goal. And we also scale that according to the density of the urban environment. So if you are in a low density area, your goal might be higher. If you're in a super built up area, there's not a whole lot of space to plant trees. We're going to make that more achievable, right? And also more feasible for your local ecology. So those goals are scaled kind of all across the country and also within cities as well. So that's kind of how we measure tree canopy need, is how much of a gap you have in terms of the canopy you have and the canopy that that sort of baseline canopy that we set.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's a lot. Like, so it's not as simple as like, okay, we need 50% tree canopy cover to to maximize health benefits or whatever. It's like, this is totally dependent on ecology, what they can support, what's feasible. So the work here is like, you've obviously gone incredibly in depth to make sure that this is not only an accomplishable goal, but also like a reasonable goal. Like this is something that you can make an argument for.
Yeah, and
to anybody,
ecologically
right?
sound.
So, yeah, that makes sense.
As well. You know.
Yeah.
And then the other part of the score is the priority measures, and that's combined social, climate, and health measures. So we get demographic information from census. We have heat data from Landsat, looking at heat severity during heat waves. And health data as well. And all of these are kind of a measure of priority. So that's built into this index to help scale tree canopy need according to kind of like that human equity first priority. And that helps us sort of identify like those communities that are hit first and worst by climate change and other environmental hazards. So so combining those is what kind of goes into your score. Anything below 100 means that there is a tree canopy need, but the lower the score, the more it can help you kind of like identify those areas of priority.
Right. That makes sense, because those are the ones you want to focus on first, is bring the ones that are closer to 0 up and just try to, yeah, absolutely. So that's fascinating. I can't imagine the work that goes into creating an equation that like that must have been ridiculous to have. Like, okay, let's bring in, like I was reading the list, right? Like, let's bring in census data, healthcare data, poverty data, age, heat, and like all this other stuff. and we're going to create an equation. Oh, and not to mention the tree canopy cover. And we're going to create an equation that tells you relative need based off of all of these things. And so I can't imagine the amount of work that goes into something like that. And this has to be the first time that something like this has been accomplished at this scale.
Yeah, I think at this scale, that's such an important piece of it, because there are people doing a lot of local prioritization in their communities, and it's really trying to pull together nationally available data and create that same sort of a tool for anyone to be able to access, no matter how big your GIS department is or your data science department is, or if you have one.
Yeah.
But it's also required some really important partnerships that American Forest has created with folks like Google and other sort of data organizations. I'm sorry, I'm not a tech person, but but Julia can certainly sort of list out the amazing partners that we've had who've been really important part of creating a really comprehensive tool that can be used at this scale.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think I want to ask about like why go that deep with it? Like, I kind of know the answer, but I would like for you to expand on it a little bit more. Like, why does the census and the poverty and the why and age and everything, like why wasn't it simply like, okay, these areas have less trees, they need more trees, right? Why put the effort into making it and making it so I don't know, robust, comprehensive, because it's got to be a lot of money to make something like this, and it's incredible, right? But I want to know the thought process, and like, what was the driver behind making this something that's like as equitable as humanly possible?
It's a really good question. I think that the answer lies in how powerful data is for helping change minds. I think without and as soon as you bring data into the equation, there's a lot out there. You really need to sort of weigh, all the local context and sort of reflect a lot of what people already are seeing in their communities. And so, I think from the sort of the priority index standpoint, these are, the indicators we use, like you mentioned, race, income, employment, age, and language barrier. These are, very well documented indicators that are used commonly in other environmental justice tools like EJ Screen or other major tools like that. And I think having having the right data is important for credibility of data of how you communicate about the issue. So I think this is one of the things I think that's really important about the tree equity movement is it is sort of a movement that is driven by data. It's, I think, for better or for worse in our society, like we rely on data to make decisions, right? We don't rely on anecdotal evidence or stories from community members, or even though those, abound. If you go talk to any community, about their experience with tree equity, I think there will be, you'll dig up a lot of, personal experiences with it, but it's the data that kind of empowers those stories and adds that credibility and makes them kind of resonate with kind of at a higher level. So I think that was really like one of the drivers is, can we, provide people with this powerful tool to help communicate what it is that they're already seeing themselves, like their own personal observations about their communities. And that might be talking with your neighbor, but that might be talking with the media, that might be talking with your board or funders, that sort of the power of data for facilitating communication and deepening those narratives.
Absolutely. Just making it, I guess, to sum it all up into one word, I said, like, kind of feels like to make it undeniable, right? Like, you're just like, listen, like, this is, like, how are you going to argue with this? Like, this, it's all there, right? Like, I think, and it stops a lot of the questions.
Yeah, and I think that's really common at the local level. Like, before this, I worked for a much smaller nonprofit, and you actually do have to make the case that equity ties into environmental work. And I think that's true of like all across, all across America when you're talking about like bring about tree equity, it's not something that people necessarily believe until you kind of show the data and show like that it's happening here. And so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the only thing I was going to add was that that's the rigor of the tool was critical for the reasons you just mentioned, right? Which is that we knew, if we were going to take this organization and pivot and help build this sort of national narrative, we were going to have to say, as Julia mentioned, like that we had the numbers behind this to back up the case. Again, we think that it's certainly been an accelerated movement over the last 5 years. Again, tree equity score being center of it, because of all of the different sort of the extreme heat and all the different trends that we were seeing combined. And so it's been a really, really important part of our quiver.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that totally makes sense, because it's unfortunately, when it comes to nonprofits, they're always fighting against the naysayers, right? You're just like fighting against those people that are just like, well, status quo is pretty good. I think, I don't have to worry about it so much. And you're like, okay, how do I shut these people up? And it seems like a pretty good way to like just add all of the possible information you could possibly throw into there. And, I'm wondering if anybody's like, or anybody will go to the point where like, okay, well, I want to see the equation. Like, how did you calculate this? Like, I'm going to do my own math, my own statistics, but I'm assuming you could
it's all on the website. We said democratization of data.
Awesome.
You can download the data, and you can also go dig right into the website and get all the equations. So, and people have recalculated it on
awesome.
local level, and you can use your own, more high, your own version, tree canopy, whatever, to recalculate. So,
yeah. That's awesome. So let's talk about that a little bit. Democratization. That's a lot of democratization of data. Let's talk about the desire to do that in this. Like, why was that part of it? Why was that something that was included to make sure that all that information was available?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Well, a lot of it, no, I mean, making it open and cost-free is an essential part of making sure it's equitable, right? So, So at the center of our mission, right, is to ensure that the communities that have not had access to the decision-making power or the information they need to help advocate for themselves now had that information. Right. And so, certainly I've certainly seen communities utilize this tool for the purposes that Julia mentioned. And then also at the political level, allowing decision makers, and governments who may not have data scientists on staff, right? Also an important audience of ours, right? This municipal governments and federal governments, who might be lower capacity. How do we ensure that they have the ability to advocate, at the political level? So we see this as really important for all forms of decision making.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Yeah, no, it seems crucial. And I think that transparency piece just makes it so much more bulletproof. You're like, listen, this is what we did. This is how we did it. What do you want to know? Like, it's just, instead of, there's always that fight. And if you can minimize that fight by just like having it open, it seems like it'll make your job a lot easier, right?
Yeah. And I think one of the things you said earlier was, it's not, we don't necessarily want to call anybody a naysayer, but what we do think is important to say is that, trees are just a very critical part of a holistic solution to improving people's lives, right? And so we never, we don't want to come here and say this is like everybody should drop everything and this is it, right? We want to say that like this is a very tangible, like rigorous way of us changing and benefiting communities, especially those that have been disenfranchised for many decades, and also saving lives, by the way. And it's also a critical part of all of cities' plans. And I've mentioned this earlier, right? This is intersectional. If we want to equate trees as being as important when it comes to infrastructure in a city as bridges and highways and others. So totally, this is all part of that conversation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Of course. Like it just makes sense that like you use the word holistic. And I love that word because I think in the age of climate change, in the age of, ecosystem degradation and in the age of deforestation and on all of these issues, these ecosystem health issues, right? Especially climate change, being holistic is huge. And it's a huge way to hedge our bets. Like we don't know what the next 50 to 100 years are going to look like. But if we can we know now that like planting these trees is going to help like this for this many years, right? Like that's a huge benefit that has minimal cost relative to the cost savings in the back end, right? And it's just, I think hedging our bets, like we're in the age of hedging our bets when it comes to environmental stuff. We're like, I think we should do this because we're not really sure how it's going to go. Like I think ecology's changed so much, or sorry, ecology hasn't changed so much, but our understanding of ecology has changed so much to the point where we're recognizing how quickly these things can change, right? And it's important just to hedge our bets, and doing this in an urban environment where the people are is going to have a huge, huge impact. And yeah, I think, I don't know if you guys have this information, but I would like to know, like, okay, let's say we hit the 500 million trees again. I'm stuck on that number because it's such a big number. Let's say we hit 500 million trees. What would be the like estimated like healthcare savings, or what would be the estimated return on investment to society, I guess I could say, if there's a way to put that, like, I mean, you mentioned a couple things before, like the CO2, right? You said if we managed to plant the 500 million trees, that's 9 million tons of carbon sequestered. That's the equivalent of 4 million homes a year, which is like, obviously that's a pretty big number. How else can we put the impact of that 500 million trees into context?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think I would just say to that it's a tough question because everything, like, it goes back to that word holistic, right? Everything is interconnected. And so when we talk about, the health benefits, I don't know if you can extract them perfectly from all the other things going on. So, that doesn't perfectly answer your question, but
reaching into the void a little bit too hard. Yeah.
But it's that idea that it's, trees need to be part of that solution. They're not the whole solution, but they need to be part of it.
And
absolutely.
And there's a lot of this is, I know you're trying to go for the full rigorous.
I'm like, how do we really hit the point home?
I think that, when we talk about even things like sort of mental health and, and we do have, there's a lot of science out there around, again, linkage between green space and trees and depression rates and anxiety rates, et cetera. And, even trying to link that to other forms of like economic productivity and et cetera, et cetera. There are all these causations versus correlations. And so, I think it would take a longitudinal study to figure out everything that, all of the data to make this 100% bulletproof. But what we know is that is what we see. And we have that in front of us through the tree equity score tool, through the movement that we were building, through the $1.5 billion that we've been able to build a case for at the federal level. And so we know that we're on the right track. And again, through the allies that we've built with cities across the country.
I wonder, like, I'm just like, because I'm in Edmonton, I'm thinking about that tree inventory that they did and how they valued the tree, right? And I'm like, something like that might be helpful in helping to tell your story, right? Like every tree planted, if it survives 30 years, this is how much carbon it'll sequester. This is how much water it'll save. This is how it'll save us on our energy bill. Something like that is I guess it's a simpler way to put that information out there without being like, we will save $10 billion on healthcare if we plant all these trees or whatever it is, right? Like it's, I have no idea how to do that one. I didn't expect you to have it, but I thought I'd ask the question.
One piece to add that I guess we didn't mention is that in Tree Equity Score, if you go into any neighborhood level score, you can, there is a scenario tool that allows you to calculate the benefits of reaching different sort of tree equity score targets for a town or county or a state even. And there are ways to, calculate even for like a small tree planting. And we describe how to do that in our user guidance, the benefits of, even a smaller tree planting. And I think like you say, that's like such a powerful tool, whether it's at the state level or at the like 10 trees planted level to be able to say, what, once that tree is mature and cared for, the benefits that it can provide. So, it's a good tool to check out in the tool, and it uses iTree data. So that's a partner that a major partner. They have different kind of benefits estimations at the county level all across America. So it kind of takes into account like differences in tree species. So when you get in, you can do kind of those localized benefits estimations.
Nice. Awesome. People want to be a part of these type of solutions, and it's often you don't have the funding or capacity or ability to make it this bulletproof, right? And so it's nice to see when you're like, listen, this is what's going on, and we can, like you said, it's tangible, right? This is doable. This is something that can happen, and you guys have funding, so or you've unlocked funding somehow. I don't know how the specifics about it, but
we have funding, and one thing I was going to say is we have helped as the federal government sort of release this $1.5 billion, but we know that's just a drop in the bucket. That's one thing we can say. And so our hope is that through the successes we might see through the ways that we work with communities on using those dollars effectively, it won't be the first time that we can see that type of money flowing towards this issue.
Awesome. That's great. No, yeah, you're going to need it ongoing, right?
And one of the prime uses of the
totally makes sense.
Score application is also to help people apply for localized funding for their whatever it is, whether it's tree planting or a tree maintenance plan or a tree giveaway program. So it can be really leveraged to kind of spread out that ability to apply for funding. So it's a major goal of ours.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I feel like it's a lot of people don't know where to start. Right? They're like, yeah, it'd be cool if we had more trees. That sucks.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think what's also just super important is we talked a little bit about partnerships earlier, both our data partners and then the political leaders that we're becoming partners with. But getting the message out that tree equity is a critical issue in this country does require us to build a larger movement, working with folks like yourself who can get the word out, but also working with other national organizations that care about this issue in their own ways, as we mentioned, right? So we at American Forest have just recently launched what we call our Tree Equity Alliance. And the goal of that alliance is to bring other national organizations to the table for us to say, and we've started with 3 core partners, Groundwork USA, Green Latinos, and One Tree Planted, all of whom work both on green urban greening as well as environmental justice and coalition building at the local level to help spread the word, right? Like it can't just be American Forest alone. We're not going to get to 500 million alone. We want to make sure that folks of all of these different backgrounds and all of these different needs can use Tree Equity Score for their own purpose. And so we're just starting. We just launched the Alliance a few weeks ago, and we are going to be quickly expanding that over the next year.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, it's such a robust thing, right? There's just so many angles to it and so many ways that you need to keep pushing. And yeah, like I imagine it just has to be this continuous push to keep the information flowing and keep people engaged with the concept, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's a campaign, as you said, right? And what we're trying to do is a full court press, right? We're trying to make sure that people have the tools, they have the funding, and they have the bodies to help, move this work forward.
Yeah. No, that's huge. That's awesome. So the funding is available through directly through your website, or how do you go about doing that if someone wanted to look for it?
Oh, so currently that 1.5 billion became available earlier this summer, and so many cities. So it was like for cities and states and indigenous organizations and tribal organizations and nonprofits to be able to apply for that money. And so they will be articulating who those award winners are in the next week, I think. And we are hoping to be one of those grantees. And so our goal will be to help push that money out towards the communities. Okay. So stay tuned from American Forest on what those funding opportunities might be. We'll know more in the next month.
No, it's an incredible endeavor, and it's an incredible idea, and I love it. And it's just it's a really cool way to, I guess, highlight the data, like highlight the point and like the massive amount of disparity that is out there, and that it goes so far as not just wealth disparity, but also trees. Like ultimately, if you were to ask someone 50 years ago, it would have been like, yeah, like would never have thought that trees would have been an important for equity, right? For social equity. So we're kind of turning a page here, I feel like, in this day and age. We're starting to understand how everything's interrelated and the balance required and what's necessary, like how much work there is to do to get a truly equitable society, right? Like we still have to get the trees in the ground to make sure that people aren't paying, way more than everybody else for cooling their home, let alone like asthma issues and health issues and all the other stuff that goes along with it, right? It's never ending.
Yeah. I mean, we say all of this with a sense of urgency as well, right? As extreme heat really being, in the headlines all summer and will continue to be both in the US and globally. We think this is the moment for us to be really pushing this work forward.
Totally. Yeah. No, absolutely. I had a question that I sent you guys regarding like, how would you emphasize the importance of this? Like, obviously you don't want to do like a 1-to-1, right? Like, okay, do we plant 1 million trees or do we build a hospital? Like, obviously we can't really do that. But like, if you had the opportunity to speak to a decision maker, about, they have money in their hands and they're ready to do one thing or the other, how would you convince them that this is the one to go for? That planting these trees is gonna make a bigger difference in the long run than some other project?
Yeah. I mean, I think we wouldn't say that somebody had to choose in that way. I know. I'm just
right? I like to do this, right? You got to make like you got to make people think about it that way. Like, how is this important relative to other equity issues, right? Sure. That people might be more at the forefront of their mind, right? Because it's more direct. Like, my kid has diabetes and needs to go to the hospital weekly to do this, and like how do you start to put it into context that like, because to me this is more of a long-term thing, right? Like the benefits aren't all up front, right? They're spread out over over time. It just compounds and gets better and better and better. So it's hard for people. I feel like we have a hard time recognizing future benefits and like valuing that over immediate kind of return on investment. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I guess one of the important pieces to take away from the fact that we have the tree equity score is the fact that this actually is quite urgent. The data shows us, right, in this moment in time, right? Some communities are much more likely to be sick or die than other communities. And it's consistently nationally across racial and economic lines. And so, these are priorities that we need to advance with local leaders and decision makers. And so, while some parts of the work around with trees and reforestation is long term, we actually know that maintaining our current canopy is critical, right? And we have that data to show us it's critical at this moment in time. So I wouldn't say that we would see all of the benefits long term. We actually would see quite a few. We see it immediately. And so that would be my short answer towards how to convince a decision maker around this. I'm not sure, Julia, if you have other thoughts as well.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think, but I think it goes back to, I mean, it's interesting that you presented like tree canopy versus hospital. I think
I don't know why I chose that. So I apologize if that's an offensive comparison, but I just I
think it's actually a good one because, like certainly in the long run, it's those avoided healthcare costs can add up from investing in the tree canopy. That being said, I wouldn't say like I don't know if that the pot is going to be the same. It's probably coming from different spots, and we're trying to just grow that
of course
urban forestry pot so that it can be complementary. And help maximize the impacts of other funding that are trying to get at some of these other pieces.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, it's huge. And I think with the work like this, with this, again, like as robust as it is and how deep it is, it's going to be hard to argue against, right? And I think if you can keep this campaign going, I can't imagine it's not going to be successful in creating more equitable neighborhoods for people. I just, I'm excited to follow up and keep tabs on what you guys are up to. This is really, really cool. So do you maybe want to explain why like tree equity is important to you personally? Like maybe just bring it home for people. Like why is that something in your life? Like maybe a way that tree equity would change your reality, like your day to day, right? How that would impact your family or your friends and that kind of thing. Just to kind of, because we've been talking about this like this big scale, right? Policies and all this kind of thing. So let's make it personal. Let's get for the last question. Let's bring it personal. I'll start, Benita. I'll start with you.
Sure. I think this whole the whole issue around tree equity for me is couched in this idea of privilege, right? I live in New York City, and my neighborhood actually is at 100% tree equity score. Excuse me, tree equity score of 100, and I feel very lucky about that because I'm right next to Fort Greene Park, and my children are 1.5 and 7, and they get the benefits of having trees and green space around them, among other many privileges. And so for me, as somebody who's been working in environmental policy for my whole career, I do the work not for myself, but for the people that don't have the same benefits as myself. And so it all feels very personal because it's just what I've committed my life to. And so, and I say this from a place of real privilege.
Right. No, absolutely. No, that makes sense. I feel the same way. I don't have my tree equity score in Edmonton, but I am constantly going like, well, I've got it pretty good. And recognizing that is the first step. Makes sense for sure. Okay, Julia, for you, what does tree equity mean to your life personally?
So I was thinking about it more from sort of my experience as like a geographer. Before this, I worked for a smaller organization in Rhode Island, and was looking at environmental disparities, not just in tree cover, but kind of coastal access and park access, and sort of as a whole, these are issues that you'll see the same thing over again, whether you're looking at trees or you're looking at access to the beach or access to a pool, whatever. What was interesting from that time was how hard it was to convince our board that equity was central to the work, and that if you're going to tackle any of these issues, you're going to talk about coastal access or talk about access to parks or green space, that equity needs to be part of that conversation. And I think kind of coming to American Forests and working on a tool, like if we had tree equity score, it wasn't out yet actually at the time. But it would have been a way to say, hey, like this is a credible data set that shows that this is a real thing. I, at the time, was trying to create that credibility by drawing from local data sets, and people were questioning whether that was credible. And so I think like that's, like that's, I think that, to work on a team that can help to deliver that, and just be like, here it is, it's at your fingertips. People know what tree equity score is. I think that helps to kind of close that gap, because those conversations are happening everywhere. And it's really surprising that it's not something that people know about, I guess. And it's not just about trees. It's in every community, kind of just how the urban fabric is set up, that a lot of these environmental hazards have this bigger impact on just certain pockets of the community. So, I think for me that feels personal, because in a lot of ways it's giving back to organizations that are really already trying to do good work and already have like the knowledge and the information. They just don't have like that kind of like backup system to like help them make that case. So
yeah, I imagine there's a lot of people breathing a sigh of relief when they go, oh, thank God. So, someone's got my back here. Like there's some information I could use to lobby my local town council or whatever to emphasize the point that, this is crucial. This is important, period. Right. Like, I can't imagine that you're the only one thinking that, for sure. It does seem huge. It's really exciting, and it's cool. And I can't wait for it to be expanded into elsewhere as well, and to start and to keep watching what you all get up to. So this is cool. Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Is there anything you want to finish with? Any extra information, or you're good?
No, I like the personal question wrap up. That was interesting to reflect on.
Good. I'm glad. Yeah, I think it's important to make things personal, right? Otherwise, we're just here talking shop, and then it's so. Yeah, that was excellent. I appreciate you guys coming on. Thanks again, and good luck, and keep on it. You guys are doing great. I'm really excited to check in every once in a while. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you so much for listening. It's not often I get to talk about social justice and equity and that kind of thing in a conversation, a podcast all about forests and forest management. So I really appreciate these opportunities to dive into these conversations that are important to everybody, right? And clearly important to society at large. So thank you to American Forest, to Benita, to Julia for coming on, telling your story, and telling us all the good work that's being done in American Forest to try and make it a more equitable world. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. Shoot me an email at yourforestpodcast@gmail.com if you got any questions, and share it on social media. All that good stuff goes a long ways. Rate and review. I really appreciate it. We'll catch you next time. Take it easy.